You're listening to Life Check Yourself with life coach, transformational leader, and dating and relationship badass, Marni Batista. Every week, you'll get the raw truth from top experts and real people on the important life and love issues you want to know about. So if you're ready to life check yourself in your relationships, your career, and the areas of your life that matter most to you, and you're not afraid to be called out on your, stuff, then you're ready for what's next.
Life Check Yourself with Stacy McAlpine. The number one thing that will predict who digs you and who doesn't. Ladies, welcome to my world today. I am feeling super excited to talk to this young lady, but she's a grown-ass woman. Stacy McAlpine is here. She is the founder and CEO of Journey Fuel and the host of the Journey Fuel Ignite Your Day podcast. She is a life transformation specialist, a seasoned consultant, a lifelong self-improvement devotee, and a badass mom of 2 daughters. We share that in common. And over the course of her 20-year career, Stacy has worked for McMaster Car Supply, Bearing Point, which is now the famous Deloitte. She worked for Price Waterhouse, Ernst & Young. She led and coached individuals and organizations in creating change and managing transformation. And she has a story of how she created her own journey to freedom in her own life check process. And so I'm super excited for you to be here today because I think for so many of our listeners, they're not aware that they can have a life where they're living it sort of on their terms. And over the last few years that I've known you, you went from like believing all the limitations that were in your mind to like, what's the right word? I was going to say like a machete, like bashing any limitations to creating life like in your own way. So why don't you just kind of talk about, where were you in your life when you started working with the Institute for Living Courageously and when you were living a life in limitation?
Well, thank you, Marni, for having me on in your aura. I've always enjoyed being in that. So Thank you. I feel honored that I get to be here with you and your audience today. Gosh, when I was born, no, I'm kidding. Basically, at 45 years old, it took me a good, probably 35 of them to get to where I felt like I had a choice of which direction I wanted to put myself down, if I wanted to keep doing what everybody else wanted me to do and just keep treading along, or actually wake up with a smile on my face every day. And when I first met you about, I guess it's like 3 years ago now, I was in a place where like life had beat me up quite a bit. I had made it through a divorce. I was finally out on my own with my girls. Things were good, but just things around that, like how to live on my own, how to make choices that I actually got to make, the ones that I wanted versus depending on somebody else and what they wanted, and being able to be okay with not having to make everyone else around me happy all the time in order to try and get through the day. And it was just a new place for me. I wasn't used to that. I wasn't sure how to navigate that. And when I found you, I was in a very sad place in my, I guess you could call it a love life.
Right.
And I was just wounded in a lot of different ways. And I just remember calling you because I needed dating advice because I never knew how to date before. And I was just hoping you would give me like this pill, secret hot Marni tip. Yeah, here, I'll answer your question on your free call. And then I was going to be on my merry way. And you just said something to me that resonated and stuck with me. And well, many things, but that particular moment was that I needed to heal myself before I could live a life of love with anyone else. And you're going to get me all emotional. I'm not going there today.
Do it.
But it's just so real and so true. And it sounds a bit cliche, but it's just not. And You've really helped me come so far and so fast, really. I mean, 3 years isn't very long. And I got a lot further down the path in my first 8 weeks, even when I first met you, to where I was determining my own journey and really excited about it and empowered, and life just became fun, and then just being able to follow that and not fall off the wagon back into the old life.
That's so funny you say fall off the wagon. So I remember some of the specifics. So can I share some of those things about your where you were about limitation?
Sure.
Okay, because there's the thing I think that's really relevant for people. And I know you know this even in your work in Journey Fuel, right? You're like, well, you could, are you unhappy in your job? Yeah, but, blah, 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 blah. Or yeah, but you don't really understand, right? And so when we first met, like I think you had a job that you couldn't stand, right? Like your boss wasn't very supportive. Is that correct? Or there was some situation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you were like, yeah, but I've got to do this because I have my kids I have to take care of. I am like the breadwinner, right?
Right.
And then also there was a whole situation going on with your ex-husband, right? And you were like, but you don't understand. Like, these are all the conditions where I'll never get peace and settle in this area, right?
Right.
And then you were just trying to get over a guy who had left you heartbroken.
Mm-hmm.
So, and at the beginning, I really think this is an important piece of your story, and the message is that, and I'd love for you to talk about it. When you first started, did you ever believe, that those situations could change? How were you locked into those things being the limits?
Well, I've always been the type that is, creative around trying to find solutions to things that I want that just usually is not simple, but complicated, yet I'm sure I can get my way around there. I'm used to working complicated routes to getting what I want. And so I felt like maybe just everything's supposed to always be complicated, and it's just like a test of my will and desire.
That's so important, right? Like right there was the limiting belief that you had that I just want to highlight, because I think people just don't even realize that, right? Like, I feel like I can get, but I want, but life is complicated and it's a matter of like just will or working hard.
Right. It's funny because I had someone in my life who said, you need a shirt that says, it's complicated. Are you in or out?
Yeah.
Because it was always something complicated, it seemed. My scenarios have always had many layers of storylines and intersections. So that's where I was feeling like, oh, maybe life is just supposed to be this hard. And it's testing whether or not I really want it. And do I really want it? What do I really want? And trying to get to that answer.
And when you had that moment where you sort of realized that it didn't have to be complicated, or that there was a possibility that hard work or that willpower was making parts of your life complicated, what was that like for you?
It was just like I can't say that word on the air. It was like a mind quote unquote trip. Like, it was just like an explosion. As I working with you and your team, I still remember I was waiting for this complicated answer when I would ask a question, and you would just pose this very simple question back. And I'm like, oh, it's just that easy. It's not this interconnected. It's like, well, what would you want? And to me, something as simple as, well, how would you want to feel? Like, blew my mind, just the idea of even thinking about it in such simple terms. So it was working with you on how to just stop tying everything to, well, what's the creative way to it? And instead of just like the direct route, which is asking myself in my heart, what do I want? And listening, and then doing it. Like, it sounds so simple. And I figured, well, that's just too simple. There's got to be another way.
Well, that's so brilliant, just right there, that you're articulating this idea that our brain, right, like our intellect part of our brain is so used to trying to like muscle our way through, and like it's like being in the great those corn mazes that we take our kids on in Halloween. The pumpkin patch,
Right.
the great corn maze of life, except it's not that easy.
Yeah.
So what did you have to do that allowed you to untangle all of the pieces that were so complicated? Like, what did you have to believe? What paradigm shift did you have to make? What actions did you have to take?
A lot of it was really just going back to the basics. I mean, like with Journey Fuel, for example, the reason why I decided to even name it Journey Fuel was it's like something to keep you going, like you know where you want to go and you just need the fuel to get there. So what's that fuel? Like, what is that going to be? And it's really knowing what you want. And so to your point of how do you make it simple, I just really had to invest in myself. Like I invested in programs with you and your team because I knew I didn't know how to do it. Like I just knew the complicated way, and just actually investing in myself the way I would in college. I remember when I first started working with you and the idea of like opening up my wallet to support myself and being happy in life just didn't connect with me. I wasn't used to doing that. And so I just equated it to, well, I paid for myself to go to college. Like I invested in myself for an education. So I can either keep going without the education and trying to figure it out, or like actually invest in learning how to do it the simple way.
I love that you're saying that there's education that you didn't have, right? Like you only know how to do it one way. It's like, I think of it like you have kids that are old enough to know more about technology probably than you do, right? And you're like, you're like, but my phone is fine. And they're like, I know. Like I remember literally when I got my phone and I was like, wait, I have to keep that button to get to the home screen. Like I can't imagine not having that, right? Like, isn't that the easiest way? And they're like, no, that's not the easiest way, right? But I didn't want to let go of what I knew because I thought that already was the easiest way. So when you think about like, what did you have to say to yourself to get past? So you invest in yourself, but then what? Because it's easy. I mean, not easy, but lots of people throw money at things, right? I'm going to invest in this diet program. I'm going to hire this coach. I'm going to get a personal trainer. I'm going to sign up for a class, right? Especially as adults, it's sometimes we put money and we think if we put money on it, then we'll do it. But that's not necessarily true. That's just a first step. So what else did you have to do to create a shift in getting away from my life has to be complicated and hard?
It was really combining all the different aspects of my life. It's funny, I'm going to get this quote wrong, but Steve Jobs said something about you can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backwards. Those are not the exact words, but I'm like, what the hell is he talking about? How do you connect dots backwards? But then the more I started thinking about it, like when I would learn something here, and then I'd learn something over here, and then 10 years later, I'd learn something over there. And I'm like, wait, I wouldn't have known how to do this today if 10 years ago, like way 10 years ago, I wouldn't have had that one project. And it just sort of was like, whoa, that's so intense. Like the universe is so smart. Like, how did it know to plant that in my path 10 years ago? And then I just thought, well, there's got to be all these little steps that I've taken in my life that have gotten me to where I'm at. Maybe I just didn't see them as part of the puzzle, or as part of puzzle's even the more complicated word. But I never really focused on where I had been. I just focused on getting through what I was in. And so, it's like I just kept trying to be Rare Rabbit, cutting through all of these pokey things, knowing that I could do it because I've done it before, but not really looking at, well, but what have I done since then that made it easier? What have I done there since then? And so it's just more like I started thinking, okay, well, if that was way easier than I thought, then there must be something else that I've done for other people that made it easy for them that I could also apply to myself. Or like, what experiences in my life have I gone through so that it doesn't have to be complicated later?
I love that. So like what I hear you saying is that you realized that all the lessons that you had learned were like leading you down this path. So if you kind of surrendered to that and then looked at where you are now, right, then how can you, it's almost like a shortcut, right? Like, it's like, oh, well, I only know this one road, so I'm just going to keep taking this one road until you finally realize like, oh, but wait, right over there is a shortcut. but I couldn't see that shortcut unless I got to this one road and got really good at it.
Right.
So, and would you say, well, let me ask you this. So if you think about connecting the dots backward and seeing that you were fully capable, so you had to believe in yourself.
Right.
And so
yeah, that's such a big piece. That's huge.
Yeah. So say more about that.
Yeah. And I always thought, oh, of course I believe in myself. But then, then it comes down to making a decision that, am I going to screw this part of my life up? And then that's not really believing in myself. Is it like, oh God, what if I make the wrong choice and I'm miserable again? I don't want to be miserable again. And it just became, well, then I'm going to go back and just trust myself because the answer's already there. And that's something that I learned a lot of that from you and your team. And just, it's already there. Just pause, tap in, and then translate with your own authenticity. I'd always wanted to be authentic. That was like a goal of mine for a long time until I finally got to a point where it wasn't a goal anymore because I just was. And it happened by going through all the stuff that I had learned from every self-development guru you can imagine, like, the Stephen Covey and Tony Robbins and Chris Howard and Rachel Hollis and Brendan Burchard, like you name them. I read all of those things and tried to pick them up and absorb them and create some way of how to integrate them into my life. And then on the other side of my life, I have my consulting background where I was strategic planning and project planning and doing these billion-dollar programs to help organizations do something they'd never done before. And I thought, well, wait a minute, like, what if I put them together? What if I put all the self-development pieces of all these great things to do in your personal life, along with all the things that I've learned in my 20 years of getting big organizations that didn't want to change or know how to change or even know where to start? How did I get them in alignment? How do I do that in my own life? Like, how can I put those all together and streamline it? And then just using those two skills together, like connecting the dots backwards, right? Like I had done all those self-development readings and all of those exercise and programs, and I'd done all this professional stuff, and putting all those dots together into one piece. Like I realized there's a reason that I've been in consulting, even though certain times I've really hated certain pieces of it, just given, people are people and environments get complicated. But the act of what I was doing, I always loved, which is how do you make something simpler? How do you make something easier? How do you make things that have never been done before happen? And how do you get people on board to do that? And I just onboarded myself into my own thing, So it was putting all of those things together and then letting all the stuff that didn't need to be there kind of fall off.
That's amazing. Well, this is amazing. And I think that's so we always talk about on our campus, like, you don't know what you don't know and you can't see what you can't see, right? Because when you're all in that pain and that struggle, you're not tapping into your true consciousness and your awareness, right? And so when you finally get to that place, you're like, wait a minute, I do this like, and by the way, like how brilliant of you to be like, wait, when I'm coming up with creative solutions for organizations, like it's not even in my control. Like all the pieces aren't in my control.
Right.
And you realize that the stakeholders, right, were like your ex-husband or your boss or all those people. And you bring it together and you're like, wait a minute, like this is the project of my life. And so I actually am totally capable. And I just love that awareness that you had when you finally got out of the struggle, I call it this struggle juggle, because what happens is we're like struggling in so many areas of our life. We're like juggling the struggle. And then you're like, oh my God, I just want one moment of peace, which is why people end up then sleeping with that guy they know they shouldn't sleep with, or, eating those 3 pizzas and drinking a bottle of wine, while they're watching Netflix, right? Because we're so tired and exhausted from the struggle juggle that we just have to numb out. So when you think about like kind of the decision that you made to architect your professional freedom, I think what's really a huge thing for you is, and for women who are listening who are breadwinners in their life, that is a really scary thing because it's like, okay, sure, I can change some dating things, or I can change my health, or I can change my whatever. But financial security, like, that's a really scary thing. So how did you architect your career freedom when you started to live life on your terms?
Yeah, money. Right? It sounds so good and so horrible at the same time when you don't have it. And yeah, it's an interesting path because my dad was an accountant. And so anything that had to do anything with money, I associated with scarcity. And so I stopped keeping receipts. I stopped thinking about the bank. I was like, whatever, I just don't care. It's going to suck anyway. I'll just figure it out. And then when I'd start to make money, when I was married at the time, my husband at the time went to law school full time. So then I became literally the only person that was making any money while the other person was taking us hundreds of thousands of dollars into debt. And so just being so broke and making so much money at the same time was just this awful thing. So I thought, oh, well, if I just make more money, everything will be fine. But I never felt like I was making more money, even when I was making it, because I was paying for all this debt. And it just was like this circular thing. And money just became like PTSD for me, And I know you know that from when I first met you and we started talking about like my own things that I wanted in my own life and how scary it would be for me to even think about ever going back into debt because of that place. And it goes back to what we talked about in the beginning. It was just, I was overcomplicating it. It was making a space pen instead of using a pencil. I don't know if you've ever heard of that analogy, but it's like, we spent millions of dollars to write in space with a pen, but at the same time, you could have just used a pencil. So
oh my God, I didn't even know that.
Right? Yeah, it's like a story. It's so funny. It was in an entrepreneurship class I took. It was talking about how entrepreneurs can get themselves into this place where they're like creating this thing when in reality, all you had to do is this one thing, like use the pencil. You don't need the space pen.
Oh, that's awesome. I love it.
But like when it comes to all the money and the pressure, it's like when you're in a pressure cooker like that, it's so hard to think any other way. And the ideas of what's real and authentic inside of you just feels like it's irrelevant. It doesn't matter. I just have to get out of this plate. But then that's when you're really not tapping into your power. It's when you're letting all that other stuff dictate the next move. And
so what did you do? Yeah. What did you do?
Yeah. So it's interesting. It's like there's a certain point at which I just resigned to the fact that my ex was going to take all my money all the time. And that was my limiting belief, right?
Right.
But so it's like I had all that in my mind. But at the same time, I'd always known that there's something more like life. I'm not scared because I know that there's a path that I'm supposed to be on and that path will be there. Well, you know what? It's like it really goes back to tapping into being creative. It's something like you had talked to us in your Living Courageously elite group, which was about like there's always more than one way.
Yes.
Come up with there's three. Like if you can only think of one way, think of three more.
Yep.
And that's such a powerful thing. And it's different from making it complicated. I talked about in the beginning, like I felt like it was always, I could get there, but if only I, tried hard enough or came up with a creative enough way. So I just thought, okay, well, if I can be creative there, I can be creative here. So most recently, like working on my last job, I was very unhappy in what I was doing, making a good amount of money, but I had my 2 daughters. I was paying, child support and all this stuff. And I'm like, okay, well, but what's a halfway to get there? If I can't have the whole thing, like if I can't have a beach house right now,
right?
Maybe I could find a way to at least like be closer to the beach and have a feeling of what I want now versus waiting until all the money's there and all the things that I could ever want are in my way, and then I'll be happy. It's more like one of the things like that, the rut exercise you talked. I don't know if your audience knows about the rut exercise, but it's brilliant. Of going through the process that you keep making these choices that get you back into the same scenario over and over. And Sherry was like, you could talk to us about, well, what are the decision points along that path and what decisions could you make differently to change the outcome. And I remember doing that exercise and I was like, I don't know if I have the right answer. Sherry, did I do it right? And she's like, of course, you know the answer to that, right, Marni? Like, of course, there's no right way.
There's no right way. And by the way, Sherry, she's talking about is our master coach who I've done a few podcast episodes with, Sherry. No right answer. Here's what's amazing, and I want to point this out because I think it's such a reflection of your growth is when you're in that achieving, like, power through all of those things, your brain is constantly looking for the right answer, right? Because you believe that there is a right answer.
Yeah.
And so getting permission to be like, wait, what is really the truth for me right now? What is the possibility for me right now? And once you were able to do that, like, what's the most courageous decision, new choice point that you made as you looked at your professional freedom journey?
Well, just to wrap up that one, the piece about there's no right answer, right? What ended up happening with that was, she's like, well, how do you want to feel in that scenario? And the concept of how do I want to feel just never entered my mind. Like, what do you mean? How do I want to feel? I just don't want to feel like I feel right now. And
yeah,
and of course, it for me, and I don't know how you guys feel out there on the planet listening, but like the idea of picking how I want to feel, just that for me, that was just sort of like a mind bend. Like, how do I want to feel? And that I had a choice of, well, how do I want to feel? And then I would pick, okay, well, how do I want to feel? How am I feeling? And how do I want to feel instead? And what would I need to do to feel that way? Just completely shifted everything in the way I think, how I process, how I help other people. Like, it really always comes back to, well, how do I want to feel instead, or just in general, like even leaving the word instead off, like, how do I want to feel, period? And what do I need to feel that way? Like, what would be in my life to feel that way? And so when you're talking about like a big decision that I made, it's like with my job at the time, it's like, I don't want to feel like shoulds, or I don't want to be in a life of shoulds. Like, I just don't. I want to want things that I want to live in a way that doesn't feel like work, like not like the career type of work, you know what I mean? But like just work in general, like what a pain in the ass. Like, I didn't want life to feel like that. And so instead of trying to come up with this right answer, it's like, okay, well, if I were to feel that way, here are the things that would be in my life that would give me that feeling. And so one of the things, like, okay, I'll give a good example of that really shifted how I help other people, how I changed my own path, which was, without going into the big, long story, I was stuck on the East Coast for 14 years. Sorry for all you East Coasters. I do love the East Coast, but I'm California. I was out there trying to get back to California, and I finally, with my ex-husband and getting him to move back, and like, it was like a whole thing.
Right.
And I ended up living inland where I didn't want to live. So I finally got myself back to California, but then under all these conditions, right, that we talked about, like the conditions they were putting on me. And so here I am living inland in Chino, a 3-hour one-way commute to my job now. And when I wasn't driving, I was flying. So again, it was like just as long as an LA commute. It was a round trip to Sacramento. And I'm like trying to drive on the freeway in traffic, hour 2.5 of 3. And I just started crying. I'm like, what have I done? Like, I've engineered my life. I picked coming home back to California. I picked this, and now it's almost worse because I'm in traffic. Now I still felt like I had put all this effort in, and now look, it's almost worse. And then I just had like this weird moment of, oh, I'm never going to have a beach house. I came here to move, and I was like, wait a minute. I wanted to live by the beach. That's where I wanted to be. I wanted to live by the beach. I wanted to see the ocean. I wanted to smell the ocean every day. Yet I was in no position at the time to financially afford that. So I started to think, okay, well, if I can't move there and buy a house for $1 million, what could I do instead? And I just started looking at, well, I could at least be there on weekends if I find a way to have, rent a little place that when I not having to be in Chino, which is where I had to live at the time, on the weekends, I could at least come to my apartment that's closer to the ocean. And I could, within a mile could go see and say hello to the ocean and just sort of, I wouldn't be able to have the whole picture right now, but I'd have parts of it in my life. And started doing that in all these different areas of my life to where now I could actually enjoy the pieces that I thought I couldn't have because I was trying to have it all at one time or felt like I had to have the whole solution first,
I think that's I think that's really a huge thing, Stacy, because when you're really looking at like, how do I design the life that I want, right? Where I feel I have freedom. I think we get so caught up in the how, and because
Correct.
our brains are defaulting to like black and white, which is like X or Y, we forget that we could like do experiments, we could do tests, we could do little pieces along the way to try and even make sure that that's exactly like our dream, right? Is it our real dream?
Right.
Is it our dream of like a childhood dream? Is it a self-imposed dream? Is it a fantasy dream? Or no, wait, actually, this is really amazing. I was able to actually do a little piece of it so that you're enjoying your life on the way to your vision.
Exactly.
I love that. So let's just continue to kind of focus on your career freedom, because I want to make sure that we tell everyone about Journey Fuel and your Walk the Talk weekend that you're having, because you're so good at walking the talk. So you ended up leaving consulting. You create a way to like start to get in your geographical home that really starts to feel right to you. And then tell everyone sort of, where are you now? So what did you do? You quit your job. Tell everyone sort of where you are now and where you are and what Journey Fuel is doing for you and how it's serving you in your life that you want to feel the way you want.
Yeah. So, COVID happens, right? And we have all different circumstances that happen around that. But I was still in consulting, and then we're at a choice point of continuing to work for big firms, continuing to work in the big consulting world, or going out on my own as an independent contractor, which when we connect the dots backwards, I had an opportunity that I didn't know was a possibility to do independent contracting at a previous time of my life. And so I had that experience before. I thought, oh, well, maybe I'll do that now. I'll go and see if I can get a contract as an independent contractor versus working with the big firm where I get my full bill rate and don't have 10 other hats working on a big consulting firm. And then I have more control over my time. So then I was literally working 40-hour weeks, and like, that's it, not 40 and a half, not 40, like literally 40. And I had one job, and it was to work for my client. I didn't have to coach anyone internally. Like, I didn't have to, write reviews. I didn't have to build business. Like, all I had to do was bill my time. And so by doing that, it covered my bills, and I could at least maintain being able to support my kids and where I was in life, while also using the time that I was otherwise using in the big firm world for work. I was able to shift that time and energy into building a path to Journey Fuel, which is what I had always wanted to be able to do for people all along. Is, I've had these different shift points in my life. I think everybody has those moments where you realize you're stronger than you even gave yourself credit for, and you then justify, say, well, because I had to be. Well, that's really not true. You just showed up for yourself. It doesn't mean that you can't show up for yourself whenever you want. You just have to remind yourself that you can turn that on. Like, it doesn't have to be a bad scenario to stand up for yourself. You know what I mean?
I love that. Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah. So it's like channeling that to being able to help people just stop worrying about the how, right? And it sounds so simple. Oh, just don't worry about how. We'll get to that. But if you start thinking about how first, it just it makes it seem harder than it really is. And that's what I had to teach my clients. Like, don't worry about how we're going to get there. Just tell me where you want to go. Let me know I need to clarify where you want to be, and then we'll architect that path. And so I would just use the same thing for my life, which is, okay, I don't need to know how I'm going to get there. I just know I have a way to pay the bills. I know that I've gone through some things that have enabled me to create a way of building my life in a way that makes me happy and is authentic and has put good energy in my life. And I want to help other people get there without having to be a pile on the floor first. Like, how can I help people get there without having to wait for that moment of despair?
And you do a podcast called Ignite Your Day, which is like a
Mm-hmm.
daily podcast. What do you love most about that? How is that most in alignment with your essential self, with your authentic self, as part of your own freedom and your own journey?
Yeah, so Ignite Your Day was created when I was thinking about, okay, so journey fuel being what is it that keeps you going in life and what can get your spark started and then keep it going. Like that's with personal development in general. It's easy to get excited about, and then when you're on your own or like you started, and then it just starts to get like easier to fall back into the normal life. It's like, what structure can I put in place that keeps me from falling back into the place I don't want? And so when I created my overall programs, like the whole point of Journey Fuel is to live a life you love waking up to. Like, you know, those days when you wake up, or maybe you don't because you love your job. But there's so many of us, and,
Yep.
you know, myself included, and where it's like your eyes will open and be like, God, really? And the one reason I get out of bed is because I had to for all those shoulds, right? The people in
Yep.
my life. And so for Journey Fuel, it was like, well, how do you want to wake up and actually love that you're awake and
Yeah.
that you get to have a day in front of you and you're not just waiting for that day to be over and survive. And I just put myself 10 years ago when I was in the lowest of my lowest place of hating where I was, and everything just felt like everything was imploding. And the idea of thinking of how to get out of it was just so overwhelming, like my brain would shut down. So I think those are the people that I want to help, right? I want people who just know that that's not what they want, but the idea of thinking out of that is just too much. The only way I could do it was just think of one step. Like that's all I could think of. Okay, I can't think about the big picture. I can't think of what all the stuff that I want, or I don't. All I know is I don't want this, but I can only do one thing today, and that's this. And so Ignite Your Day was born from that, which is it's one little action, one little thing that doesn't seem like work. And that's what Journey Fuel is all about, is how do you do it without it feeling like a should? Because until we want to do it, or until we feel like it's part of this bigger experience of our life, it just feels like a pain in the ass, even if we
Right.
know it's good for us.
Yep.
And so Ignite Your Day is like, I created a theme of, okay, so there's Get Your Mind Right Monday, there's Hot Tip Tuesdays, there's Walk the Talk Wednesdays, the Thoughtful Thursdays, like a different type of a theme of each day. So it's not just like, oh, let's go develop ourselves today. It sounds really boring. So like Mind Right Monday would be, oh, okay, so if you turn music on today, that'll get your mind shifted. Or, you know, Hot Tip Tuesday is, you know, did you know that this can help this, you know, in time management type of stuff. But it didn't sound like work. It would just be
I
something
love
fun.
it.
Yeah.
I think that's so brilliant. And I love that this is a really important concept, is how can you transform your life into the life that you love? I love that you say like where you love waking up every morning. We call that like living life on your terms in a
Yeah.
way that doesn't feel like work. And
Right.
it's one small step at a time. And that's what I think your
Exactly.
podcast is so, I think it's brilliant. I think it's so amazing. So Stacy's having a weekend event in the end of January 2022. So if you're listening to this before then, you can find out about it in our show notes. If you're listening to this after January 30th, 2022, you'll find a link in the show notes on how you can follow Stacy and start to subscribe to Ignite Your Day to fuel your journey, which I think is so amazing. So if there's one thing you want to sort of leave people with about, you know, if you would have known that whole, like, what's your tip? You know, like,
Yeah.
what did you really know and learn that someone listening could implement, could take on for themselves so that they can stop living in their world of shoulds or have tos?
Yeah, I would say it's really connecting back into not feeling like you need to know the right way out, or it comes back to how do you want to feel? Not how are you going to feel that way ever, but like how do you want to feel? And know that if that's a feeling, once, like, you know, and you know this because I learned a lot of it from you guys. and then just infused it with a lot of the other things. But as soon as you know that, it's like in project management, that's the number one thing I would ask every client. What is the ultimate outcome? Like, what is it that you want to have and why, right? So in our own lives, when we're super overwhelmed, that's a lot to think about. So it's like, if you just think about how you want to feel. So for example, like if you're feeling overwhelmed, it wouldn't be, I don't want to feel overwhelmed anymore. That would be Marni saying, that's not how it works.
Right, exactly.
It would be, I want to feel loved, for example. That's all you need to know, right? Like just know the feeling. And then once you get there, it's like, okay, well, what resources do I have for me to be able to leverage, to be able to get there? Like I had a student in one of my classes, or if you want to call it a class, my workshop that I did before. She's like, I want to feel loved, but I don't know how to do it. So I'm just not going to do it. It's like, well, how could you learn how to do it? Like, what are 3 things you could do to learn more about? Like, you don't have to know the answer, right? But know that there are resources out there. So I think the biggest takeaway is it's okay to think about how you want to feel without it feeling like some pipe dream. You know, it always seems like, oh, well, I can think about that, but that's stupid because I'm never going to feel that way. It's so easy to go there because you don't have to have all the answers. Just starting with, how do I want to feel? And what are the resources I have to at least get me one step closer? And that's kind of like what Ignite Your Day, like one step, one thing. What's the next thing you could do to get closer to knowing how to get there? That's probably the biggest takeaway that
I love that. I love that because when you think about the feeling, we always talk about high quality questions, right? It's something that's it's in your control, right? And so if you could just start to ask that question and before we go, and so what if someone says, Stacy, I don't even know how I want to feel.
Then it's to know how you want to feel.
I love it.
How could I get closer to knowing what I want? What would I need to know to, like, there's so many different things that to twist into, you know, telling yourself you don't know the answer. But, and I'll give lots of credit to you, Marni, and your team is just the right asking questions that are going to give you new answers, or at least not just be the same old, like, getting you more wrapped around the axle, right? It's so easy. The more questions, it seems more complicated and overwhelming. And it's just easy to just, rather than think that way, to just shut down and not think that way. But it's really not, because it builds and builds and builds until life just feels like, I thought it was purgatory. I literally thought life was purgatory. It's like, this is supposed to be like this, maybe. It's supposed, you know, no, it's not. But how do I want to feel instead? I want to open my eyes and not, you know, I want to feel happiness. Just, that's enough. Okay. What could I have in my life that would give me happiness? Or if you don't even know how to get that for, like the person I told you about in my workshop who said she wanted to find love, you don't have to know how to find it to want to feel that. It's just, what's the next step I could take to get closer to knowing those answers? And that's it. Just that one next step until you can get to where you've built up enough energy and passion and fire within, right? To get the energy to want to take it and do more steps, take a bigger leap. But getting yourself just to take the next step is probably the best thing I've ever done with my life. You know,
I love that.
The next step. Don't stay in the same place.
Exactly. Get your ass off the floor and take one step, because everything is possible. And I love how you have completely been in the process of re-architecting and redesigning your life. It's super inspirational. Ladies, check out Ignite Your Day, where you can listen to podcasts, link in the show notes. Definitely check out the Walk the Talk weekend. Follow Stacy McAlpine. She's amazing. We're so happy that we are able to help you live life on your terms and that you love waking up in the morning. It's been so much fun having you on the show. Ladies, whatever you do, it all starts with one thing. Life check yourself. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye. You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Hey, thanks for tuning into today's show. So if being in an intimate relationship in which you feel 100% seen, heard, and accepted by a high caliber man is a priority for you right now, and you're interested in seeing if you're a fit for working with me and my team at Dating with Dignity, here's what I want you to do. Just head over to DWDVIP, that's D as in dating, W, D as in dating, VIP.com, and book a call to speak with my team. We'll get on the phone with you for about 60 minutes, and you'll get crystal clear on what's stopping you from finding true love right now. We'll also take a look at what you want to create, what you want your whole life to look like when you're able to finally be fully expressed as a woman in a healthy relationship with an incredible guy. And if we can help you get from where you are right now to where you want to be, we will show you the fastest path possible that makes sense for you to do that. We help smart, successful women all over the world solve this one missing piece in their life so they can finally have it all. So to see if we can help you do the same thing, head over to DWDVIP.com. I'm Marni Batista, and let's talk soon.